is Rachel Wells. I am a licensed mental health counselor. I am also trained in EMDR and a registered yoga teacher. And I'm here to talk to you today about LGBT mental health, especially for those in the adult performance industry. So basically, LGBT clients have been pathologized for a very long time. Some of us may not be familiar with the DSM, which is basically this big Bible of disorders, so to say. And homosexuality used to be in there, as well as what they call transvestic fetishism, gender identity disorder, all sorts of ways to classify people like us into an othering category, as if it was something that we're manifesting something wrong with us. So there's a long history of difficulty for us to get mental health care as LGBT folks. So in the ICD-11, which is basically what everyone else uses in everywhere else but the United States, they now just have gender dysphoria, and it's not even listed anymore in those derogatory ways that used to be. So they also have gender dysphoria in the DSM-5, which some people say leads to medicalization of especially trans folks, and basically keeping with that disorder pattern, but it's also helping us get access to medical care. Because if it's something that insurance can bill, they can help us get things like hormones and resources. Of course, there's still a lot of gatekeeping with these situations. A lot of folks will have to go to therapists to basically prove their identity, if they've lived socially as whatever gender they are wanting to be and really already are. And then this therapist will have to write a letter. So a lot of times it really depends on a lot of other people and what their perceptions are of your needs. And this can really make a lot of people not want to go to therapy, not want to even try to access things like hormones or any sort of medical care at all, because there's just so much stigma and there's not a lot of resources. So, another issue that's being worked on is that LGBT people are not really discussed in counselor education programs. So these are the programs like I went to, where you basically learn some of the nuances of therapy. There's a lot of classes on, the boring stuff that you would expect, theories, blah, blah, blah. And there's sometimes a class about human sexuality, sometimes a class about multiculturalism. So basically, the airtime that we get to talk about our issues is little to none. We may have an hour chat about LGBT people's needs, which most of that discussion goes towards learning the vocabulary to be used in the community. And while this is important, it doesn't allow for any sort of follow-up to go on. It doesn't say specific needs that might happen or barriers that people might face. It just kind of gives you a way to refer to people, and then that's it. So a lot of therapists coming out into the field are not aware really of how to meet people like us, our needs. Sometimes we come in and people don't know what trans is. They don't know that it's not just gay or lesbian. They might be using derogatory terms. They're not aware of intersex. They might be using old things like hermaphrodite or transsexualism, which, although some people may identify with these terms, overall they're considered offensive. So we've got right off the bat people walking in and feeling a sense of distrust. So as you can see, it's hard for people to even get started. And as LGBT people, when we're coming into therapy, and there's adult performers coming into therapy, there's just a huge misunderstanding about the specific needs, and people are only being taught the basic language. So folks in the adult performance industry may literally be paying with their time, money, emotional energy to educate the therapist, which I'm sure most of us, when we go to therapy, we want to be able to walk in and feel like it's home. And we're having to explain parts of ourselves, compartmentalizing our identity. And this is really overwhelming. It's the professional's job to know. And I know not everyone can be a specialist, and not everyone can know everything all the time. And knowing about the LGBT community doesn't mean that that person knows how to engage in therapy with you specifically and how it relates to you. But having to go and build from the ground up is exhausting for us, as I'm sure some of you can relate. So into some of the darker stuff that might bring us to therapy. The LGBT community faces constant threats of violence, bullying, misgendering, hate crimes, and ultimately, in some cases, death. The death toll of trans folks, especially trans women of color, every year continues to rise or stay steady. Regardless of visibility or acceptance, we are still seeing hate crimes. So the stigma runs very deep. And in many instances within the adult performance industry, cisgender, which if we're not familiar with that term, basically means not trans, so identifying with birth assignment, they may even be outing or harassing their fellow trans performers. Although this is a rarity, it does happen. And this can bring down someone's career, their level of safety. It's that sense of competitiveness that we have in not just the performance field, but in any field, that is making LGBT performers feel unsafe. So this is something that we need to work on as a community to be educated on. Of course, there's intersectionality, so LGBT performers living with HIV, as well as LGBT performers who are migrants or ethnic minorities, are of course further marginalized. The more marginalized identities someone has, this lessens their access to care. Because with every identity we add on, I know that's a strange way to say it, we're basically making the pool of therapists and helpers very small, which shouldn't be the case, because it's not on us, but this is how it is right now. And that's why I'm talking to you today. So intersectionality is a huge part of mental health, and it's important that you're able to go to therapy and find the right person, and you feel like you can talk about not just that you're LGBT or that you're in the adult performance industry or sex work, but that you may also be a person of color. You may also be undocumented. You may have an HIV status. Many, many other things. You may have a disability. The list can go on. And we need to feel like the person sees us so we can actually get to work on these things. So going back to this HIV situation, is that 33 to 46% of HIV infections could be avoided in the next decade if sex work was decriminalized and there was more education. So this stigmatization that we live with, feeling like there's something inherently wrong with us, we're bad, broken, scarred, whatever it is, which often comes from how society treats LGBT people, obviously how society treats people in adult performance industry, the stigma just keeps latching on. And this is how we end up with major depressive disorders, self-injury, which goes beyond cutting. I think a lot of us think of cutting or using substances, but this can be eating disorders, self-punishment like over-exercising, managing your food in a way where if you don't exercise one day, maybe you're not going to eat as much, but you're valid when you're exercising and you're allowed to eat. These ways that we monitor ourselves to really have a sense of control. So if we can't feel like we're in control of the stigma that is trying to oppress us out in the world and out in our jobs and communities, we're going to find ways to try to exert control. Also, suicidal ideation, anxiety disorders, PTSD, very high in this population. and continued vulnerability to victimization, physical, verbal, mental, sexual, financial abuse. Because if we're raised in an environment where we don't feel like we're worth anything, whether that's a parent who doesn't accept our LGBT identity, or we're just in an abusive household regardless, we go through life carrying this burden, and we're going to end up in situations, not because we want to, but because it might feel normal, or it might feel comfortable and make sense to us, where we're further being hurt, harassed, and abused, because all we're doing is seeking safety and love, but we're searching for it with people who may have reminded us of parents, abusers, because we're trying to work it out. We're always trying to work out the original attachment wound, which is what we call the bond between child and parent. We're always trying to figure that out. And imagine if you're getting kicked out of your household at a young age, like many of us do, or we're just outright being ignored. That part of our being has to be compartmentalized and shoved off to the side. You can be my child, but I don't want to know about that. Or don't tell anyone about church about that. Or you're starting to fragment and have these different facades. And it's hard for us to feel whole and complete. So we're going through life with parents doing this, and then the counseling relationship is supposed to be a way for us to be able to feel like we can manage a parental relationship, what is called an emotionally corrective experience. So if you're walking in and someone's already reminding you of that time that you got kicked out, or told that I don't get it, I don't understand your lifestyle, whether that's for being LGBT, performing, a little bit of both, are we going to come back? Probably not. So compared with cisgender adolescence, which, as we know, being a teenager is a hard time. This is our time of life when we're starting to identity build. Transgender adolescents had double the rate of depression and anxiety and triple the rate of suicidal ideation and self-harm. The numbers speak for themselves. We're taking it out on our bodies and ourselves. We're harboring this internalized homophobia, transphobia, anything like that. And we're wielding it as a weapon against ourselves because that's what we've been taught to do. And when we go to therapy, that's our chance to unlearn that and to basically drop our weapons and unlearn some of these toxic, fundamental, foundational things that we've learned from society, parents, peers. So it should be a safe place for us. So specifically speaking towards transgender women, especially of color, the prevalence of depression among these women in the US for now ranges from 42 to 64%, 5 times higher than the general population. This is almost all of them. Almost all trans people are dealing with life or death situations. So some ways that we can start getting help are groups. Now I know that hearing that might bring up some fear and anxiety, because maybe we don't feel like we belong in a group. Maybe we've never stepped foot in any type of therapy, so this is not making sense. How could there be a group of people like me? Where do I find this? A lot of questions that can stop us from getting therapy, which in essence can stop us from ever healing and breaking that pattern. Each of us is walking around either continuing the pattern of trauma or breaking it. So there's a type of group that I would recommend to anyone watching this if it's in your community. They're called psychoeducational groups. Fancy name for basically an informational and educational group. Research shows that group counseling overall works for LGBT folks a lot better especially in the trans community with trans women, because there's that sense of community, that communal bonding is part of the work. So these types of groups can address visibility, safety, acceptance, and how to navigate the continuum of transition for trans folks if they are seeking that path, and just give you some of the basics, which in this society are not really the basics, and tell us how to get things like name changes, where are safe places to go, some of that underground knowledge that we might not be privy to because most of society is not providing us access to that, not talking about it. So this can help build social support and self-esteem, which across the lifespan, things like stability and social support sometimes can help even more than things we've been told are great for us, like exercise, etc. So we need this. Some of you hearing this might be like, no, I don't need anyone else, get that away from me. I hear ya. But we're all born wanting to bond and attach, and we may feel like that's not possible for us. We've already been told maybe that we're worthless, we're not good enough, we'll never amount to anything. And we're taught, if we've gone through abuse, which as we know, most of us LGBT folks have, especially if you're in the performance industry, we're not worth anything. So we're looking for motives for people. When someone's wanting to approach us to build a friendship or engage with us, instead of feeling like we can just be authentic, we're bringing out one of those masks or one of those facades, like I mentioned earlier, to try to protect us. So as much as we want to bond, we want to protect from it because it doesn't feel safe. So I understand that hearing group counseling can be very helpful. It might feel like a challenge for us. There's a part of us inside that's probably wrestling around saying, nope, not going to do that. Listen to that part, accept where it's coming from, but you know what's best for you. So these groups can be very helpful at helping you instill hope and feeling like you can change your life situation. So those in the LGBT community will often return to the same stressors after therapy and after group therapy. We know that therapy doesn't solve everything and life isn't perfect, so we're going to go out and we're going to get misgendered. We might go through abuse, homelessness, suicidal ideation, mental health conditions. However, with these groups, we'll at least have ways to cope and to know that we're not alone. And as cliche as that sounds, it's necessary. Because sometimes, especially those that do like cam modeling and cam work, that can be very isolating. It's certainly very rewarding, but when you're in front of the screen and people might be mirroring some of the things said to you that you may have heard in childhood, adolescence, we're getting triggered. So we want to learn how to cope with people that are trying to disrespect our boundaries, that are trying to bring us down. And we also want to combat the isolation that can come from certain types of adult performance work, because that work's important, it matters, and it can be enjoyable to you, and it should be. But we want to find ways to connect with people also in the industry outside, so we can feel really seen and heard. Because sometimes when we're behind that screen and people are typing things to us or private messaging, it takes a toll at the end of the day. So some current issues that are facing LGBT adult performers that we need to work on as a community are working with producers that may be fetishizing or outwardly homophobic or transphobic. We're getting away from this a lot. We're not really seeing this much anymore, but it can be out there and we have to be aware. The big thing is Facebook's legal name change policy that they're trying to roll out and have been trying to roll out for a while, making it so that if we have a cam name or anything like that that we use for our performance, it is being eradicated and we're being told to use illegal names, which can be very unsafe on multiple levels. It can make it easier for a family to find us that maybe we don't want finding us, or they don't know that you're in the adult performance industry. And these are things that could really be life or death, or at least threatening in some way. So this is an issue that we need to stay on top of and be aware of, and make sure that we're following. There's definitely limitation of support for this non-affirmative care that might be out there. Isolation from public resources, clients and other performers outing, again, like I mentioned before, whether it's the LGBT status or that you're working in the industry. So really important needs are seeking affirmative support, and I'm going to list a couple of ways that we can find that. So if you want to get out a pen and paper, jot this down. So first, there's Pineapple Support, which is a foundation that helps connect people in the performance industry with therapists who really understand and can help and be kink aware and just performance aware and industry aware, and help them navigate this very specific and nuanced situations that can happen there. And it's a wonderful resource because it can help connect you with a therapist in your area that you can see face to face, or if there's not access, something over at what's called teletherapy, which is almost like a Skype or a Zoom type thing, which is HIPAA compliant, which basically means that it's encrypted and secure. There's also the GLMA, which helps you search for medical and therapy providers in your area that have some sort of competence with working with folks like us. Kink Aware Professionals Directory, or the CAP, is also a great way to find, especially if we either work in more kink industry, or if that's just a part of who we are, or a little bit of both. 7 Cups of Tea, which Pineapple Support also has a specific group for, which is basically an active listening website. So it's not therapy, but it's a helping hand, a listening ear. Just on a rough day, you can just log in and have a private conversation. 741-741, which is the crisis text line. What this does is allow you to text a crisis counselor who may or may not be trained in therapy, similar to the 7 Cups of Tea, but more imminent. If you're feeling like you're in danger of harming yourself or someone else, or you've just had a really, really rough day and you don't know where to turn. None of these conversations are listed in your phone bill, and you will never be charged for the conversations that you're having. Trans Lifeline is a great resource. It is a hotline for trans folks. It's staffed by and for trans people. That's 877-565-8860. And then the Sex Workers Outreach Project. There are also some apps on our phone, if we do have access to a phone that has an app store. Things that we can do now. Because I know if you're watching this, you might not be able to go to therapy right now or get connected. You might still have some worries or fears about doing that, and that's okay. That makes sense. But perhaps dipping the toe in with some of these apps that can give you immediate coping skills and ways to relax and soothe yourself. There's an app called Insight Timer. This has about 15,000 plus free meditations. You can search based on the gender you want to hear, how long, etc. What's Up is an app that can guide you through if you are dealing with a crisis and give you immediate skills. Relaxation melodies, another type of meditative style. Vent, which is exactly what it sounds like, venting anonymously online. New RX and Lemonade Health are ways to get things shipped, prescriptions shipped to your door that are discreet. Calm Harm, which is another one that helps us when we're in crisis, kind of like a safety plan to help us think through our next steps. And then some things that we can work on, especially in tandem with a therapist, but maybe we can start thinking about now, is setting boundaries in order to differentiate between sexual behavior in the context of our work versus personal preferences in our individual sex life, when possible, being selective with types of clients that we choose to engage with, limiting involvement with certain clients that may ask us to basically bulldoze or overextend our boundaries, separating work and home life as best as we can, challenging internalized ideas about ourselves and others, about our authenticity and trustworthiness in private, intimate relationships. I think this can be a challenge in the adult performance industry when we, are just, you're doing work, and then you maybe share with someone that you're interested in, and they're looking at you as if there's something wrong with you. Again, going back to that idea from potential early childhood trauma. And they're questioning if you're trustworthy to date or engage in an intimate relationship with. And continuing to remind yourself of the power and control that you have in your work. There are times where we don't always have the most control, especially if you're starting off in the industry as an LGBT person. We don't always have all choices all the time. There are moments where we may have to push past our boundaries and do things that we're, questioning. This is reality sometimes. But once we start getting on our feet, realizing that we have a right to separate work and home life, and that we don't always have to be on, again with this kind of mask and facade idea. The biggest thing is establishing a sense of community. I could not stress this anymore. This may begin online and eventually transition to in person. Again, connecting with those resources mentioned before. Reach out to your local adult performers if there's anyone you know in your area. Start a conversation. If you have an LGBT health clinic nearby, reach out to them. See what they can do for you. Is there a partnership or awareness about adult performers in their clinic? Is this something you could start? Is there a group? Regardless, seeking out that sense of community and never stopping, because there's a lot of times where it's difficult, but connecting with other performers in your area is crucial. Just to know that you're not alone. There are other people like you. You can just talk about work or vent, and they'll get it, and they'll get you. And I think all of us need that. And on a wide spectrum, which is something that hopefully all of us are working towards, is the partnership and collaboration between adult performers, support groups, and LGBT centers, that we can engage in an understanding that these two can't be separated. LGBT rights fall hand in hand with adult performer rights. It's all about managing what we do with our body on our own time, our private life, and respecting that without judgment. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope you got a little inspiration to maybe reach out and know that there is stuff out there. Unfortunately, we have to look a little bit deeper, but maybe some things that I left you with can be of support to you in the meantime on your journey. And I wish you the best in your journey of mental health and your work in the industry and everything you continue